When I put Cushing's and Metabolic Syndrome into the search bar, I got more on veterinary medicine than on humans. This is, some of the frustration of looking through the material out there. Anyway, there was more information on differentiating metabolic syndrome and Cushing syndrome in horses and dogs. So I thought I'd share a picture of a horse with Cushing's for levity's sake. I actually met someone with a horse with Cushing's, and they could either medicate the horse or shave them every year. And she actually chose to shave her horse every spring. This is my homemade chart to really put emphasis on some of the commonalities of certain endocrine conditions. Metabolic syndrome, PCOS, and Cushing's all exhibit high cholesterol, insulin resistance, and or diabetes, high blood pressure, weight gain. So it's so important to get your cholesterol checked, your A1C checked. If you have a weight gain, you might, or an unexplained weight gain especially, have these things evaluated and get it nailed down to, what the problem is. I just see, it's anecdotal, but I could just picture in my mind the overweight guy who's been diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. And, sadly, some of these guys drop dead of a heart attack. And I would really encourage these men to get evaluated for Cushing's because they don't put enough emphasis on it, in my opinion. Also, that makes the list with, similar symptoms as hypothyroidism can raise your cholesterol and with a weight gain, and growth hormone insufficiency gets 3 out of 4: high cholesterol, insulin resistance or diabetes, and weight gain. So, I just cannot put enough emphasis on getting good care. Thank you for listening. This is a typical chart for metabolic syndrome, obesity, problems with triglycerides, high cholesterol, hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, leading toward diabetes and hypertension. And I believe what they have added to the list is snoring and sleep apnea. And anecdotally, I think that might be caused by inflammation. But the point being is, what's missing? PCOS and Cushing syndrome, and maybe more. But the point being is that the medical community generally falls short. And in this chart, they're getting a little better because they do include polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. But really, what I found confusing about this chart is the apple and pear body types. They have a pear for a female, and I always think of a pear shaped as carrying the weight more around the hips and thighs. So, it's confusing to me. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but how about you guys? It took quite a little bit of digging to find this one, and this is diseases for which metabolic syndrome may be an alternative diagnosis. And voila, it includes Cushing's and PCOS. And it mentions other illnesses that it can be associated with. Hemochromatosis, that's when, I think it's inherited, but it's when the body accumulates too much iron in your system. Fatty, or then the PCOS, fatty liver-induced metabolic syndrome, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And I'm pretty sure that could be related to insulin resistance and probably not an illness unto itself. And it could be a dietary issue. and insulin resistant issue. I looked at a few workups for morbidly obese people going in for bariatric surgery, and they're really getting down to business on this one. This one was much more thorough than anything I read. For example, they might mention testing cortisol, but that's it. They were not specifying ruling out Cushing's. Okay, so anyway, um, this workup is so thorough. They're looking for Cushing syndrome. They want liver and kidney function. They're looking for a insuloma. I'm saying that wrong. Insulinoma. And that's a tumor in the body producing insulin. That could wreak havoc on your body. So they're looking at lipids. And they're pursuing the insulinoma issue. They say serum cortisol, but they, further on down the way, they're looking at the 24-hour urine, and that's a much more detailed test than a serum cortisol. And I'll just quickly mention, I have never had a cortisol out of normal for my AM serum blood draw, never. And that's with Cushing's and, a lot of endocrine problems. So it shows up in other ways, like a 24-hour urine. Okay, so they're doing a glucose tolerance test, um, and a cortisol or a dexamethasone suppression test. This is so thorough. This is beautiful to see. And they're doing a chest x-ray looking for heart disease, adrenal scan, pituitary scan. They are looking for tumors or an underlying condition like Cushing syndrome. And they're looking for an ACTH producing tumor that could cause Cushing syndrome. And they're also looking at polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so this is outstanding. God bless them. I don't proclaim to be an expert on all of this, but look again, looking through a lot of literature, this looked like a really good diagnostic criteria for PCOS. They're looking at pituitary hormones all the way on the left, at the estradiol to rule out hypothalamic amenorrhea, and that is the absence of menstruation. And they're also looking at primary ovarian insufficiency, and that has to do with those, same hormones, or at least the FSH. Next, is the woman being virilized, masculinized, so they're looking at the DHEAS, and they want to do imaging of the ovaries and also imaging of the adrenals. And I would even suggest that the pituitary would be a good idea at that stage of the game. And then they're looking at other symptoms, the fat, the stretch marks, the hypertension. I hate the term buffalo hump. That's fat on the back of your neck, okay? And it's just insulting in my opinion. But anyway, so then there's getting into ruling out Cushing's. Yay! At the salivary or urinary cortisol, and then the dexamethasone suppression test. That's all appropriate to Cushing's. And they're also ruling out acromegaly, which is too much growth hormone. That's why they're looking at the IGF-1 to be high in that instance. And that's when, the hands and feet keep growing and the jaw, that type stuff, that in the hands. But that would be a pituitary issue also where there's too much growth hormone. Also in this workup, if you look up further higher on the chart, They're also, ruling out pregnancy, thyroid dysfunction, and hyperprolactinemia. And that can be confusing with PCOS, a prolactinoma, giving PCOS type symptoms, and then congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And, that is, I'm not going to get into it right now, but it can cause some serious adrenal dysfunction. This looks like a really good chart to get hypothyroidism properly diagnosed. It's a whole algorithm, and it takes a good doctor to evaluate what's going on, here's an example. Um, if the T4 is low and the TSH is high, this is toward the middle there, and they're testing the antibodies, AB positive or negative. If it's positive, it's indicative of Hashimoto's, and then, you could commence treatment. Um, and, if you have low T4 and low TSH, then you could be looking at hypopituitarism, and then, the flow chart would want you to test different pituitary and other hormones, um, and then even do stim test to diagnose hypopituitarism. So it's complicated. It takes a good doctor to evaluate each hormone on its own accord and know what to do with it. Feel free to pause it and read over. It's just a ton of information on this, but it takes more than a T3, a T4, and a TSH to really, evaluate what is going on with your thyroid. And that does include getting the antibodies tested, and that I will get outlined in a different video. These are essential labs for a thyroid workup. And it goes beyond just looking at your thyroid hormones and the thyroid stimulating hormone. It's looking for autoimmune conditions. And it's also looking at RT3. I don't know a lot about that. That's where you really appeal to the authority of a good doctor. But these are all involved in the algorithm, the process of evaluating your thyroid on the prior slide. So, and then, then the doctor will be able to evaluate these things and pin down whether you need treatment and what's wrong.